Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Noam. Thank you for coming to my talk today. I'm going to talk to you today about your new BFF, Backend for Frontend. We're going to write a full-stack app. We're going to do a lot of live coding. But before I start, let me get a bit of background. I'm guessing most of you do Java, right? OK. How many of you do also a frontend, like React? Wow, cool. Vue? Angular? OK, Svelte? Cool. And on the back end, how many of you use Node.js? OK, cool. We're going to try to help you change that today, to use more of Node.js. So, as I said, I'm Noam. I'm from Israel. I'm a software developer for many years. I currently own my own company, but at the end of the day, what I like to do is writing code, and that's what I try to do most of the day. I spent the last 20 years working on modernizing of large enterprise applications that involve hundreds or sometimes thousands of tables and thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of forms. The kind of enterprise applications that people use, such as banking, insurance, CRMs, ERPs, manufacturing, etc. Throughout these applications, you kind of see a common thread that goes by it, and I kind of feel that there's not enough innovation in that area of development. Like, there's so many cool things for so many other things, but hardcore business applications don't get the innovations that I think they should. I'm lazy, super lazy. Okay, I think if I weren't lazy, I wouldn't be anywhere. I'm error prone, so I need tools to protect me from myself. And I really like to deploy application. You know, I'm impatient, so I want to get things done quickly. Usually when I write an application, it will meet its users within the first week, okay, in some functionality. So my strategy for writing such applications, I would usually go with a single-page application because I don't care about SEO. These applications are internal business application, and my users spend their entire day in front of it. Okay, so I want them to have the best experience, the best responsiveness. SSO is not for me. This is an interesting part. A lot of people do Java on the back end and React on the front end, or some people even do Node.js on the back end and React on the front end, but they still write different codes. They wear different hats. Now I'm a front-end developer, now I'm a back-end developer. Different tools, different syntaxes, different stuff, and I really hate it. So I try to pretty much create my code in a way that I don't really care if on the front end or on the back end. I would usually go with a monolith because I'm lazy. And I think that I should handle problems as they arise instead of spending time early for potential problems in the future. So I will start with a monolith, and if my team will become big enough to become multiple teams, then I'll consider splitting it up. I will use a relational database because I don't understand people who don't. I want the database to work for me. Although I've done some things with Mongo, but I really prefer the database to do all the heavy lifting for me. And that's it. So when you come to build an application, what are the building blocks that anyone needs when he's building what we call a CRUD application? So we need a backend. In our case, we'll use Node.js and not Java. Please forgive me. And some kind of front end. We're going to need model types on the backend and model types on the front end. We're going to need CRUD API routes on the backend, put, post, delete, get, and some kind of services or code in the front end that could use them with React Query or Axios or whatever you want to use. We'll have data validation on the backend to protect our API and some kind of data validation in the front end to get front-end validations for our users. We're going to have some roles, access controls on the API, and also on the UI. Users will be allowed to see different things based on the role in the organization. And then we need ORM, SQL, paging, sorting, filtering, real-time, routes, and components. That's it. That's all you need to know to start a one-table application. Okay? So when I came to look at this after several years in the industry, I said, okay, it just doesn't make sense. There's so much unwanted separation of concerns. There's so much duplicate code. If you consider these elements from both sides of the equation, it's like a socket and a plug. It's a mirror image of one another. And since I'm lazy, I don't like doing things twice. And since I'm error prone, when I do it twice, I break it. Okay, because I'm never consistent enough to do the correct typos even between those or casings that I always fall with. Also, all the data access, paging, sorting, filtering, there's a lot of repetitive boilerplate code that we copy and paste from one controller to another with the mistakes, with the vulnerabilities, and then comes the security audit, and they hate us, and we hate them, and I just hate that. So really, I don't like boilerplate code. Okay. Now, modern full-stack frameworks in the last few years, like Next.js or Nuxt or SvelteKit, Remix, Redwood, T3, started addressing the problem. They started sharing some types, started sharing some API calls, but I still think that for large enterprise applications with hundreds of tables, there's just too much work to be done. In the way I think of it, all of these different items are reflections of a business entity. It can be a customer, it can be an order. It's just different views on that business entity. So I want to have a single source of truth, an entity, and all of this which should be derived from it. So I started with this idea a few years ago, and it worked. And ended up calling the project Remalt, and I'm going to show it to you today. It's an open source project. So as I said, this is a live coding session, so this is almost my last slide. What we're going to do today is we're going to take a front-end React app. We're going to build a Node.js server, Express server. And we're going to have end-to-end type safety, server-side paging, real-time live queries, lots of stuff. And if we have enough time and the gods of deployment would like us, we might even succeed to deploy this to the cloud. Sounds like a reasonable use of our time? Cool. So let's go and play with our code. I apologize for being with a white background, but somehow I've been told that it's easier to read from the far benches. So if not, let me know and I'll switch to black if you need your glasses, your sunglasses. OK, so I have here a React app. Quick question, how many of you use Vite and know what Vite is? OK. What are the rest of you doing? OK, so Vite, I'll explain in a few words. Vite is a bundler that takes our JavaScript and HTMLs and bundles it into bundled JavaScript and HTMLs. It also provides us with a development server that whenever we make a change to the HTML, it will hot load the HTML. So we get a great developer experience, and it's an amazing tool, and we love it. So here it is. Here's a little to-do app. And let's go ahead and review the code. We have a front-end folder with app.tsx. Here we have our tasks, the state in the front end. Okay. We have the code to add a new task that serves this form over here, where I can say a new task, and it will add it. But since this is just a front-end application, nothing is stored. So when I refresh, I lose the data. We had the code here to set things as completed and to delete tasks. So I can set tasks as completed and delete tasks that I want. And we have some code to set all tasks as completed. So I'm going to set all completed and uncompleted. And here's the simple HTML for it. The form, the tasks, and the buttons for set all completed. Pretty straightforward React app, right? This really isn't a presentation about React, but all of you can follow the React code here? Cool. So we want to have a full stack application, so the first thing we need to add is a backend. Okay, so let's do that. I'm going to go to the source folder. I'm going to add a backend folder, and in it I'm going to add an index.txt file. And I'm going to say export const app express. So we have an Express app, and I'm going to test it. So I'm going to say /hi. Hello, J focus 2024. Great. Now, currently I use Vite to hot reload the front end. I also want to use Vite to hot reload the backend. So to do that, I'm going to head over to our Vite config file. I'm going to import Express from the plugin and say Express source backend. So as soon as I do that, Vite will reload both the front end and the back end. And to test that, I'll just go over here and say hi. And it works. Cool. So far, just wiring, we've added a server. That's how easy it is with Node.js to write a server. I love that about Node.js, the simplicity of things. So back to our goal. When we consider this application has a single entity, the task, and we have its type over here. Our task has an ID, title, completed, and created at. The first thing I want to do is share this type between the front end and the back end. So I'm going to head over to our source, and I'm going to add a folder, call it shared, and I'll drag and drop the task to the shared folder. OK. So I think this should be my single source of truth. I think that everything should be a reflection of this. I want to use this as the definition for my database, for my API, for my front-end query language, and pretty much anything around that. And this is where remote comes in. I'm going to give it the entity decorator, and I'm going to allow all CRUD operations. Later, we'll restrict that. I'm going to tell it the ID is a CUID, title is a string, completed is a Boolean, and created at is created at. Okay, that's it. 5 decorators telling the code what is the meaning of each and every one of these columns. Next thing I want to do is I want to have an API for it. So I'm going to go over to our index.ts. I'm going to import remote express, define an API, and I want the API to register in the entities array our task entity. And I'll ask Express to use my API. So as soon as I do that, and if the gods of code are with me, I'm going to go API tasks, and I have an empty array. Okay, so I have a REST API endpoint just like this. Let's go ahead and play with it. So if I do get, I get an empty array. If I do post, it posts to the backend. It generated an ID, and update the completed and created that. And if we refresh the browser, we see that we can get the data. Okay, so just with these 5 decorators and 2 lines of code, we got a fully functioning API, REST API. Next, since I don't really like typing, let's go ahead and hijack this data and send it to our API. So I'm going to go over to our application TS6, highlight this array, cut it from here. So we see there's no more state in the front end. Back to our request. And it posted all of this data to our API. Now, you might ask yourself at this point, what database are we using? Okay, and usually when I start developing, I don't want to care about which database I'm going to use. I think that's a technical decision that I want to postpone to the point where I actually need it. So in this case, we use a very simple JSON database that makes life very easy. Just stores the data in JSON, and you can see the data in front of you, update it, get it to refresh to you. And of course, later in this demo, we're going to grow up and use a real database. Cool. So 4 decorators, REST API. Now let's go ahead and consume this in the front end. So to use this in the front end, I'm going to define over here a task repo, which is a repo of task. The same task types that we used on the backend to define the API is used now in the front end to define our repository. Okay, and we're going to use the repository pattern to read, update, delete from our database. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to say use effect, which is React's version of onload. And I'm going to say task repo, find, then set tasks. Yes, and empty array. And curly brackets. Nothing like live coding, huh? Yes. OK, that's it. So now I got the task from my backend to the front end. And if we check the network tab, we can see that it made a basic REST API call to the backend. Okay? And those of you who don't use React often, ask yourself, why does it send it twice? That's because React is evil. It does that only in development. In runtime, it doesn't, but in development, it's annoying. So here we are using the same types that we defined to use on the server, and we are using it now on the front end. Now, getting all the data from the backend is nice, but it's pretty naive. In most cases, you probably need some kind of paging, some kind of server-side sorting, maybe server-side filtering. And that's easy. All of that are just arguments that you send to the find option. So I can say here, limit 2, and it will go get the top 2 items. I can say page 2, and it will go get the second page. And you can see that it's all REST API calls, standard, clear, and obvious. I can do server-side sorting according to the created at, descending or ascending. I can filter by saying completed true or false. And all of those are just standard REST API call. So by using the same type in the front end and the back end, I get a fully typed experience end-to-end. I don't get to worry about different casing, different data types between the backend and the frontend. It even does type checking on the frontend. So if I send here string false, it will give me a type error, showing me that I've done something wrong. And if I say undefined, it goes and gets me the entire data. So now that we've got the data, it's time to realize the C and the U and D of CRUD. So first thing I want to do is be able to add a new task. So I'm going to say await task repo, insert. And I don't need all of this because the server already took care of that for me. So now I can add a new task. And we can see that it was added. And we can see that it was a standard post call through the REST API to the backend. I can set stuff as completed. I can save changes. So task repo, save. And now if I check something as completed, we can see put requests being sent to the backend and updating the data. And this is where a nice little JSON file comes in handy because it actually refreshes in real time, which I like. Very useful when you're developing. You don't have to use so many tools to look around your database and everything. So we've done insert and update. Now let's just go ahead and realize delete. As you can see, I'm error prone, I promised you. So here we go. Now if I click delete, it will call a delete HTTP call and delete a row from the server. Okay, so it's just a few lines of code, like 5 decorators and about 6, 7 lines of code in the front end. I have an end-to-end query language fully typed between me and the backend that supports the entire CRUD functionality. Now, at this point in time, our users have used our applications. They like our application so much that they gave it to a second user. And that second user opened his own browser on his own device and started making changes. And user number 1 did not see those changes. I'm sure that all of you had that. You kind of ask them to please refresh, and they don't like it. They prefer that it would just happen out of itself, and then they give you the argument. In Google Docs, it works. And I really enjoy when they give me such arguments. Having a live query capability is not an easy thing to implement, unless you have it out of the box with a Firebase or something. To implement it yourself, it can become very, very hard. But I think that's the entire point about Remult. We didn't invent any wheels. We just took existing things and made them more accessible or tried to provide a better developer experience to use them. So to use live query functionality over here, all I need to do is change the find to live query, the then to subscribe, because I'm going to get a stream of data. Subscribe gets an info object that I can tell it to apply the changes to our tasks. And I also need to return this. That's React's way to say unsubscribe when the component unmounts. So as soon as I do that, and again, if the god of presentations are with us, any change that I'll do will be reflected on all devices. I think it's cool. I like it. In case you're wondering about behind the scenes, it really doesn't matter because we're using a plugin architecture, so you can replace it to be whatever you want. In the development, we're using server sent event, HTTP server sent event, which is a great and simple way to communicate. You can use WebSockets, you can use PubNub, you can use Ably. We have adapter implementations for many of those, and you can create your own adapters for the things that you like the most. Great, so after we completed reading and updating data, comes the nasty point of validation. And validation is, again, one of those concerns that I always get wrong. Even my bank, which is the biggest bank in Israel, when I try to export credit card usage to Excel, it limits me to 6 months backward. But if I go and take the URL and send it myself, I get whatever I want, okay? Which is kind of sad because it's the biggest bank. This is one of those things that represents a lot of duplicity. You have to implement it in the front end and the back end. It's annoying. I want it to be in my single source of truth, in my task. So if I want to prevent the user from adding empty tasks, like I did right now, all I need to do is on the title here, I'm going to say validate, validators required. And as soon as I do that, if I'll try to add an empty task, I will get an error. Now notice, I'm disabling the network tab, sending the data, doing the add operation, and I'm still getting the error even though there's no network tab activity. So we have front-end validation. Now let's go ahead and bypass that. So we'll head over to our request and try to post an empty object. And we get the same validation running on the backend. It also returns a structured validation error that I can use to understand which error belongs to which input in my HTML form, so I can provide a great user experience for my user. Now, at this point, you might say, well, built-in validators are fun, but I want something custom, and that's really just as easy because everything can be an arrow function. So I can say task, title, length is greater than 2, or too short. And now if I run it on the front end, I get front-end validation. The code runs in the front end to validate, and the same code runs on the API layer to validate the data that comes into the API. Okay, single source of truth. Great, so after we've done that, our user comes to us and say, hey, you know what, I have a lot of tasks, I don't want to check them one by one. Please provide me with some functionalities that will iterate over the tasks and updates them. And usually, it will be the front-end developer who meets the user, because the user doesn't get what backend is. And he will try to do his best to implement it. So let's go ahead and try this as front-end developers. I'm going to go over to our app TS6. I'm going to go to the setAllCompleted method or function. And I'll say for task in await, task repo find, await, task repo save, or update of task and completed. Great. So now, when the user clicks set all completed or uncompleted, it works. At this point, my user is happy, I'm happy, but my boss not so much. Because my boss looks at it and say, check out the network tab. Look at how many calls are you making to the backend. What if you had 1,000 tasks or 10,000 tasks? This would take a long time. And this is one of those places where me as a developer hate changing hats, because at this point I will need to put on my backend developer hat, change the syntax, change the way I write. Hopefully not in Java, I'll do it in Node.js probably, but still, switching hats. I hate that hat switching, even though you have a nice red hat over there. So let me show you how I do this with Remote. I'm going to go and copy this function, and for the sake of being organized, I'm going to add a class and call it tasks controller. I say export class controller, and I'll paste the function over here. I'll make it static, and I'll decorate it with the backend method decorator. The backend method decorator tells Remalt that if you're about to run this method in the front end, please don't. Make an API call to the backend and run it over there. And all that is left is to define a task repo. So just like before, I had task repo. I'm going to use the same task repo here. Same API, same capabilities. But if previously the repo made HTTP call over REST to the backend, when I'm using the repo on the backend, it's going to interact directly with my database. So I can use the same syntax, both on the front end and the backend. I don't have to switch my way of thinking. Let's export this to the API. So I'm going to head over here, add the controllers array, and in the front end, I'll say await task repo and tasks controller, set all completed with the completed. And now, there's a single API call to get it done. Okay. So by using the same principle of repository in the front end and the back end, the same developer experience interface, I can switch between backend and front end seamlessly. I can have code that sometimes runs on the front end and sometimes runs on the back end. I don't need to have separate skill sets to do that. And since I'm using the same types between them, then it checks for type capability. So if I put a string here, it will tell me that I'm doing it wrong. All of those little errors that I always get wrong as an error-prone developer, I just don't need to do them now. The tools will protect me from it. Cool. So we've accomplished setup, entities, paging, CRUD, live, validation, update. Next thing we need to do is database. So far we've been playing with our JSON database, and it was a lot of fun. And now I want to use a grown-ups database. So for this demo, I'm going to use Postgres. So I'm going to head over here, and I'm going to say import from Remalt Postgres, create Postgres data provider, and I'm going to tell Remalt that its data provider is Postgres. I'm going to give it a connection string that I've prepared in advance. At this point in time, it refreshes, and I don't have any data because my database is empty. If we check out the terminal, we can see it actually created the table for me. Okay? Of course, you can have your own complex migration process, and it will work just as well. But this is a very decent algorithm that just adds tables and columns. So when you're developing, you can move fast and have fun. Okay, so now we have our database. Let's go ahead and add the data to it. And now I have all the data over here. But now it comes from our Postgres database, not from our JSON file. So entities, paging, CRUD, live validation, update, database. The next thing we need to talk about is authentication and authorization, because so far we've been pretty naive. Anyone can do anything, but none of our applications look like that. And just like everything else, this is a concern that gets lost between the front end and the backend, because you are taught, and you should, protect your APIs. Okay? But you should also provide a great user experience, like don't show buttons that the user is not supposed to use, or stuff like that. It's also a concern that spreads across multiple forms, multiple controllers. In my case, I want it in my single source of truth. So I'm going to say over here that only authenticated users can see the data. And as soon as I do that, I don't see the data anymore because I'm not authenticated. Now, authentication is a topic all within itself that is outside the scope of Remalt. You can use whatever you want. You can use Okta, which I promised them that I'll say it. You can use pretty much anything. In my demo, I'm going to use cookie session for the demo. But it's really not relevant. The relevance here is the single source of truth, setting it in my entity in a consistent manner. So to implement basic authentication, I'm going to add over here cookie session. So what have I done? I've imported cookie session and set it according to the session secret. Okay. I have a static list of users. For this naive example, it's okay. In real life, it's going to be either a database or an external provider or whatever you want. And I've used a simple express route to sign in, sign out, and get the current user. Now, I'm sure you want to ask yourself, why am I not using backend method for this, as I've shown before? And of course, that in real life, I will use backend methods for this. I'm showing this by using a simple express route to show you that Remalt doesn't own your stack. Remalt is something that you use within your existing stack, okay? Which means you can have express routes side by side to Remalt routes, and it will all work well. Okay, so you don't have to be all in or all out. It doesn't have to solve all your problems. Use it for what it does well, and for the rest of the things, use whatever other thing does it well. And for the front end, I'm going to add a sign-in screen. So instead of app, I'm going to say auth. And now we have this nice sign-in screen. Let's review its React code. We have a sign-in method. We're using fetch to call the backend, again, to show that Remalt doesn't own your stack. You just use it. And sign out and current user. So let me sign in as Steve. And I still cannot see the data. Okay? And that's because we've implemented the authentication method, but we haven't told Remalt how does it know who the user is. So to do that, we'll head over to our API definition. And we'll tell Remalt that to get the user, it needs to go to the request, session, and user. Okay? Just like we've set it over here. And as soon as I do that, I can see the data because my user is authenticated. Okay? Now that's nice, but it's also not very realistic because in most cases, not all users are born equal. Some users are privileged. In our case, I want to say that only, or no one can delete, because no one should ever delete, I think. And only admins are allowed to insert. Okay? Just like everything else, I set it in my single source of truth, in my entity. And now, if Steve will try to add a new task, they will get a forbidden error. Now, let's go ahead and nominate Jane as an admin. And let's sign out and sign in as Jane. And try to add a task. And the task was added. Okay, but if I sign out and sign back in as Steve, we will still not be able to add a task. But that's not a very good user experience, right? We don't want Steve to know that he's underprivileged. We want to hide that from them, okay? So, but again, I don't want to have duplicate code. I don't want to do if admin. I want to reuse the same definitions that I have in my task entity. So to do that, I'm going to head over to app TSX. I'm going to highlight the form, and I'm going to say here that my task script or metadata, only if API insert is allowed, only then show the form. So now Steve cannot see the form anymore, okay? And since it's all in a single source of truth, any change that I'll make over here, like commenting this out, will immediately reflect on both API and frontend. So I can get a consistent experience through my API and my user experience. Great, so we've done setup, entities, paging, blah, 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 blah. Deployment. Done authentication, now deployment. Do you want to see this deployed to the cloud? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to try. Cloud can sometimes be not as predictable as you want it on the first deploy, but let's try and let's give it a try. So I'm going to head over to, first of all, I need to make it cloud ready. And in this case, I want to say that the connection string comes from an environment variable called database URL that I'll provide to it later. And since in the cloud, I'm not going to use the Vite hot reload engine. I'm going to use the static files that are the result of its build. I'm going to say over here, serve static files, which means when I'm not using Vite, go and get the files from the dist folder, which is the output folder of the bundled files that we create, and return them to the browser. And listen on port that you are given as an environment variable or 3002. Now, before I deploy, I need to test. So let's go ahead and make sure that I've done things right. I'm going to do npm run build. In this case, Vite will build my code and place it in the dist folders that we've described. It's the same dist folders that we are using over here. And I'm going to do npm start. And now I have my server working on 3002. And if all goes well, it should work. I still think it should work. What have we missed? Any tips from the cloud? No, I think it should use the 3002, as I've highlighted here. I didn't save. You see this? Wow, that was scary. Love live coding. So build and start, and it works. Okay, so now we are ready for deployment. You can deploy this to any Node.js server or serverless architecture. I'm going to use Railway. How many of you know Railway? None. Okay, let's go back. How many of you know Heroku? Okay, cool. So we all used to love Heroku because they were free. But now they're not free anymore, so everybody moved away to Railway or other things, and even those other things stopped being free. Railway is great. They give a great developer experience, cost pennies. You know, I'm running sites there for $2, so it's fun. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to do Railway init. Let it, inspiration, give me a name. Nice name. I'm going to do Railway open. And it will open the developer console for Railway. And then I'm going to say Railway app. And it will start uploading my source. Okay. On the back end, I'm going to go and say, let's add a new service, database, Postgres. And while it spins it up, in my original service, I'm going to define the environment variable of database URL. Okay, it's the same variable that we've used over here. And let's deploy it. Great. And you can see the previous deployment failed because it couldn't connect to the database because we didn't give it a database URL. So now it's redeploying. And I'm also going to ask it to define a domain for me. Okay, so we'll be able to access it. And now, while it deploys, let me talk about a few more things. I'm going to take this opportunity to give it time. So Remalt fits your existing stack. You don't have to change the way you work. You can add it to whatever project you're using today. You can use it with any frontend, Vue, React, Svelte, Angular, Quick, Solid, whatever you like. You can use it with any Node.js backend, Express, Festify, Nest, Next, Nuxt, SvelteKit, whatever. You can use it with even every database, like MySQL, Postgres, Mongo, SQLite, SQL Server, Oracle, or any other, because you can just implement another adapter and use it with anything. And we also have tools that allows you to extract your existing schemas into entities, so you don't have to type too much. And you can run it on any server or serverless runtime, and to some extent, even on Dino. Now, Remalt has a lot more capabilities than I had the time to show you so far. If I have more time, I'll try to show it. Let's see if you still have time for me. But based on the same single source of truth, just like I've derived the database and the REST API, I can derive GraphQL or OpenAPI with those same definitions. Reuse that. How do you get it? Make a multiplier on the benefits that you do by managing your single source of truth. It has lifecycle events where you can control everything from how it's going to be saved, how it's going to be deleted, automatic filters that you want to add, and so much more. You have relationships. You have fields that can only be updated on the backend, or fields that are only visible on the backend based on roles. For example, a salary only the admin should see, or password nobody should see. If you don't like decorators, although I don't know why, you are welcome to use decoratorless support. And if you don't like TypeScript, you can use JavaScript and JS docs. It's no judgment here. Let's go back and see what we've done so far. Hopefully, it will say that it's completed successfully. And let's try to open this URL. OK, so it's working in the cloud. And I'm going to have you, hopefully, I'm going to sign in as Jane. I'm going to give you a very important task. Give Remalt a star. It's open source, and we live on stars. And I will create a QR code. And I will ask you guys and girls and everyone, read this QR code, and let's see if it works. I'm going to take this opportunity to do a selfie with all of you. I hope you're OK with that. And please tell me that it works. OK. So, great. As you can see, the live query actually works. So I kind of enjoy this part of the demo. This would be a good time to talk to you about our website. So we have remalt.dev. Let me use it on the second screen here, so you'll still be able to see what you're typing. So this is our website, remalt.dev. You can click Getting Started over here. And there are tutorials to do everything that I've done right now with your favorite front-end framework. You can use it with React, with Angular, with Vue, with Next, with SvelteKit. You can go to our YouTube channel, and you can see videos of tutorials from start to deployment to the cloud, step by step, with fun. We also have a lot of example projects. And my favorite is the CRM demo that kind of shows you how a CRM application can and should look like. So this one is implemented with React. And it's all based on entities and Remalt to get the job done. You can see here that it's entities just like the ones we've seen here in the demo. Okay? And as I said earlier, you can actually multiply your investment in your entity with different other viewers of it. So with Remalt comes a built-in admin that if you enable it, can show you the tables. And you can choose see the data, drill down through the data. Okay, it makes it very fun when you're developing. You don't have to create those admin screens right away. You can use this as developers and later go from there. It also shows you a nice diagram of your entities and your relationship, which I think is super cool. You can, again, reuse that to have Swagger, for those of you who like Swagger. So OpenAPI support based, again, on those same entities, just 3 lines of code, and you get Swagger. And another 3 lines, and you get GraphQL. And I've recently learned that I can actually click here and say companies and items, and I want to get the city and the name. and have a GraphQL query that runs on it, again, reusing those same entities. So I hope you find this interesting. I think this is a good time for questions now. Anyone have any question? Yes?
How hard or easy would it be to separate the front end and back end if you wanted them deployed in different...
It's a breeze. It's not really a problem. Here I just deployed them in the same server just because I'm too lazy to create two servers. But in real life, you can deploy it anywhere because they're separate parts of the applications, the API and the front end.
When it comes to this example, we used TypeScript.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, for both the backend and the front end. So React.js as a front end and Express.js or Node.js as a back end. I want to use backend as a Java
Mm-hmm.
and front end as a React.js. I can couple.
I understand. I'll repeat the question because I missed that last time. So the question was, in this demo, we were using a Node.js end-to-end, which was a lot of fun. But in some cases, I have a lot of code already written in Java. Okay, I have an existing backend, and I want to start using this. I'll tell you what I do in real projects that I work. I come from, God forbid, C#. Please don't shoot at me. I come from C#, and I have a lot of legacy code in C#, and I really like remote. So my way of tackling it is have a hybrid server. We'll have a Node.js server for the things that Rimal does easily and fun, and a legacy C# or Java for the heavy lifting, or for the complex processes. They can live side by side. They can be one as proxy of the other, and it works magically.
It works.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my microservices are like that. So we have separated. So now I think it's the best time to adopt this Java and React in the one. So that's why I asked it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that would be a great strategy. I think remote is all about, again, not owning your stack. Okay, because many of these frameworks, like if you look at Next or SvelteKit or whatever, you have to be all in or all out. And I think with remote, I've taken an approach that I live in the world where there's existing applications. Not too many days you get to write a whole new application. So I believe in evolution, not revolution. So you can go ahead and, as you've mentioned, put Java server next to a Node.js server, either proxying or side by side, and use that. Or if you're already using Node.js, you can just add routes that are based on remote to your existing. Sorry? The bundling itself of the front-end code is JavaScript and HTML. So the result of the build, let's go back to my head code here over here. Here we go. I'm not used to it being so pale. Let's do this. When I build, so the question was if the result of the bundling is the jar, or what is the result of the bundling. And we see here that Vite generates an index.html, a CSS, and a JavaScript file. Okay? So, but again, this is just the front end that I've chosen. You don't have to use this with Vite, by the way. You can use it with Create React App, or with Angular CLI, or whatever tool you like using. So Railway is, the question was what is Railway? And Railway is a managed cloud provider, which means I'm too error-prone and lazy to learn AWS. Okay, and to set up a server on AWS, I always click the wrong buttons and end up paying hundreds of dollars by mistake. So Railway kind of solves it for me. I do a Git push to them, or they can either connect to my GitHub repo, or I can just upload source code like this. They will spin the machine for me. They will set it up. They will do everything around it. And they also manage my Postgres database. I don't have to create my own VM and manage it. They give me managed services, and they do it at a very reasonable cost. If you want to see my... Yes. You can use their servers to deploy your code if you need to deploy it in the cloud, if you need to deploy it in an easy way. Of course, you can deploy it also to Vercel, or to AWS, or Google services, or Microsoft services, Azure, whatever you like. So if you want to use Railway, if your real application is an internal organization application, you probably have your own server and you can run Node.js there. You don't need Railway. Railway was just providers that have used here to demos that they can deploy it. Okay, Remote is completely open source. You pretty much don't need anything for it. Okay? In this demo, I was showing Railway because it allowed me to allow you to connect on the cloud and see it cool and enjoy it. And you can see they're very, very reasonably priced. Like my CRM application costs me $2 a month. Yeah, for the demo. But if you use it in your own apps, use your own servers, you don't need anything. Cool. Is there any more questions? Yes, please.
The decorator-less syntax, what does it look like?
A bit different. There's actually two syntaxes for that we're working on. One would be, actually, I think I have an article on our website. That's the best place to go to. So we're going to go to Remalt, and I'm going to search decorator, working without decorators. Aha. So that's how it looks like. I have a class, and then I have a describe method that describes the data. Okay? We're actually working on another syntax that is similar to Zod, if you're familiar with it. So you can also use that in the next version. Yes. Any other questions? Yes, please. I'm going to repeat the question to make sure that I understood it. So from an authorization perspective, can I use rules per objects, right? Something like different users can see different rows. Okay, perfect. So yes, okay. Short answer is yes. A bit longer answers highlights that you can define something that we call API prefilter. Okay, API prefilter is a filter that is added to any API request that comes in. So I can say here, if you are an admin, you can see all the tasks. If you're not an admin, you can see only tasks that you are the owner, and that's added to everything. I don't need to worry about it. The framework handles that for me. Okay? And I can do the same, also have a backend prefilter if I also want to enforce this on code that runs on the backend. Okay? Which makes it very easy to use when you have multi-tenancies. You have your same application for different companies and stuff like that. You just define a backend prefilter, and that's it. Okay? Any other questions? Okay. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. We have a lot of these for you. There's a lot of Remalt stickers over here, so that you can come here and get them. And I invite you all to come to remalt.dev, try it out, join our Discord, and have fun.